Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Happy New Year. It's nice to see you, and I hope that you have had a sunny summer down in Christchurch.
No,
and to all
really.
members...
Utterly dreadful. Never mind.
I'm sorry to hear about that, Mr. Speaker. But to all members, welcome you and us back to Parliament, to all of those who support us, making this place tick, staff of all sorts of jobs, welcome back to Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I spent the summer, much of it, travelling around, listening to people, asking them what it is that they are looking forward to, what they're worried about and what they hope for in 2025. And I went as far north as Northland, as far south as Southland, and I listened to people who were police officers, who were tradies and builders, people in accounting, people who write software, people who teach in schools, you name it. I heard from New Zealanders, and if I was to play back the mood music of those responses, it would be a little bit like something Crowded House once said, now we're getting somewhere. You see, Mr. Speaker, people understand that we've got a big mountain to climb, that there are a lot of challenges, but I think they'd find it totally implausible for Chris Hipkins to stand up and say, everything is terrible, but only 18 months ago when we were in charge, it was fantastic. And one reason that they would find it implausible, and all of the hyperbole, actually, I think Chris Hipkins might have got a thesaurus for Christmas, all of the exaggeration that we heard from, people know that the facts are one of the biggest issues they have is the cost of living. And when this government was elected, inflation was running at 5.6% per annum. It had peaked at 7.3% per annum a year prior to that. And today it is down almost at the midpoint of the target band, 2% inflation. That is a real change. That is a real victory for New Zealanders, that while prices may still be high, they have stopped rising because this government has killed inflation. And then people would say, OK, we know that has been tough and we know that hard decisions were required, but we still want to see this economy get going and get growing. And they can appreciate that that is not easy, and if it was, everybody would be doing it. But we can start to have a mature discussion about what are the factors that make economies grow. Now, I listened very carefully to the speech of Chlöe Swarbrick, and she seemed to romanticise a time in New Zealand's history, 200 years ago, when there were no fences, there were no property rights, there were no buildings, and there was no profit. Perhaps what she forgot to say is that 200 years ago, life expectancy in New Zealand was 40. I mean, that tells you about the sense of rationality that we're getting from the Green Party. In fact, Chlöe Swarbrick's speeches these days are so unhinged, voters are actually moving to Te Pāti Māori. You wouldn't believe it. But, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we have an orthodox view of economics which understands that if we want our economy to grow, if we want people to have security in their jobs, if we want, as one young person said to me, to be able to get ahead without leaving the country, then we need to understand where growth comes from. And it starts with having investment so people have capital to work with. Somebody digging a ditch with a digger can dig it a lot faster than someone with a shovel. But you need investment capital to do that. And the same goes for every business up and down this country. How do we get capital to grow and be more sophisticated so we can sell better products and we can pay our workers more to make them? So what's this government doing? We're making it easier to get capital from outside the country as well as inside. We're reforming the Overseas Investment Act. And I hear the people on the other side say, this is terrible, we'll be serfs in our own land. Imagine if other people from other countries wanted to actually send their money to New Zealand and invest in businesses so workers could produce more and get paid more. That's what they're really saying. That's what they're really opposed to. But this government knows if we want workers to get paid more, they need more capital. And here's another thing that we could do, is improve our banking sector. For example, we have a Reserve Bank governor who put in place capital requirements that have pushed up the price of borrowing to every firm, every farm and every family in this country. Now, our Minister of Finance could pick up the phone and say, it's not going to work, mate, just drop it. These capital requirements were put in place in order for us to get through COVID, in order for us to get through a major shock. And when the shock of COVID-19 came along, guess what? Actually, we were fine with the old capital requirements. We never needed to have them phased in at all, and we should drop them today. That would reduce the cost of borrowing for New Zealand families and New Zealand firms. Another thing that we need for economic growth, besides a supply of investment capital, is we need skills. And in particular, we need to make sure that when a child spends about 12 or 13,000 hours in the education system, that they actually receive the knowledge and the skills and the habits and abilities required to succeed in a modern economy. And I'm proud to be part of a government that is upgrading the curriculum, that is working hard to stress the importance of actually going to school, since New Zealanders were told for years that maybe that wasn't so important. I'm proud to be part of a government that this week is having 7 new charter schools open, because oftentimes it is not the school, it's the school that the student is at today is the one that they may not be going to too often, and they're not learning. One example is a charter school in Christchurch opened by a collaboration of 4 state school principals, and they've said there are students that we know we are not and cannot serving to the best of our ability as educators. So they've set up and sponsored a separate charter school amongst 4 state school principals so that those children will have a place to go where they can flourish and they can reach their potential. Mr. Speaker, another thing that we need beside people with skills and capital is a regulatory environment where people can spend more of their time doing the thing that their business and their career is set up to do, and less of their time trying to fill out forms, get permission, and be told no too many times. Mr. Speaker, it's the teacher or the early childhood educator who says all I wanted to do was help children reach their potential, and all I actually do is fill out forms for the Ministry of Education. It's the builder who says it takes twice as long to get permission to do this as actually do it. It is the person who goes along to get a loan who finds that they can't because the hurdles they have to jump over are absurd. And we actually heard this from Chris Hipkins in his speech. He said that this government's approach to regulation would strip New Zealanders of their protections. He couldn't give a single example, but I'll give him one. The triple CFA changes that his government brought in at the end of 2021 effectively tanks the housing market that November. Because people, actually it was that December, November was the peak. Because people went along to their bank and they found that to get a minor increase to their credit limit, they had to tell the bank how much they spent each month on pet food. People think I'm making that up. That actually happened in New Zealand under the previous government, and they knew it was wrong because, to give them credit, they actually removed the rule. So again, if we're going to have a rational discussion about what sort of things a government can and should do, then we can all agree there are some regulations we need, others that we don't, and we should get rid of the ones that we don't. And thankfully, this government has a fantastic agenda of regulatory reform. Nicole McKee on anti-money laundering and countering foreign terrorism laws. Brooke van Velden on health and safety at work laws. Chris Penk on building materials, making it easier to get in foreign building materials. Chris Bishop and Simon Court on replacing the big daddy of bad regulation, the Resource Management Act, so that New Zealanders can use their property and develop it on a basis of respecting private property rights. And aquaculture, as Shane Jones says, will be easier to do in this environment. That is the kind of regulatory reform that will mean that everybody, from people who are farming the land in order to feed the world in this country, to people building a home, to running an early childhood centre, to giving out a loan to someone who's trying to get ahead, will be able to spend more time doing their actual job than doing their compliance job. And the most important change, in my view, the government will make is to introduce and pass the Regulatory Standards Bill so that finally New Zealanders will be able to actually point to a statute that sets out the rights that they have when the government wants to regulate away their ability to use and exchange private property. That is absolutely essential to any society that wants growth and wants to be wealthier. And you just have to ask yourself, who would work hard and give up today for a better tomorrow if they think that their rights can be wished away with the flick of a pen? It is essential in any society that you are not subject to arbitrary takings, regulatory takings, or having what you've worked for taken away at a moment's notice by a government that doesn't hold to its own standards of regulation making. This is the kind of progress that this government is making, serious, well thought out process in order to ensure that we have better policy so that New Zealanders can thrive on their own terms. And then we hear again, and it's low quality debate, people talking endlessly about privatisation as if it is some enormous evil. The simple fact is that in all societies, some people may be interested to know that even in the Soviet Union, people covertly held private property. You can never quite get rid of all of it, I'm sorry, folks. The thing is, in all societies, there is a mixture of public and private ownership and a mixture of public and private activity. It is true in healthcare today. Every GP clinic, every pharmacy, many of the theatres where operations are done, they're all private. Many of the doctors who are working doing those operations or doing those consultations, guess what? They're working for private businesses as specialists. Many of the medications, in fact, all of the medications people are taking and all of the medical devices they're using, they're private. So it's crazy to think that there is only public or private healthcare. Every system has a mixture of that. And my challenge and my question is, do we have the right mix? Because in the last 5 years, we've increased spending by $10 billion, and still most New Zealanders would say we have first world people with a system that is letting down those doctors, nurses, orderlies and allied health professionals while still failing to satisfy the desires and the needs of every single patient. So perhaps we could have a grown-up discussion about it. How do they do it in France? Well, for the most part, the government assists people to buy private insurance, which has them treated largely in private facilities. Now, if France is a bit too scary and capitalist for the left, perhaps we could have a look at some of the countries in East Asia. There is more than one model and there is more than one way of doing things. And if we want to succeed as a society, then we need to do better in health and education. And the same goes for the government's balance sheet of capital assets. We're a government with $200 billion of debt, scheduled to pay nearly $10 billion of interest on the debt. That's real money. That is, doing quick mental arithmetic, $2,000 per New Zealander in interest payments next year, just the interest on the debt. Now, if we're going to pay, did I get that right? The guy from King's says, check my maths. Oh, she said, thanks, Labor. He's still in the tribal politics. I thought he was helping with the maths. You see, the thing is, we need to ask ourselves, if we have $570 billion of assets and $200 billion worth of debt and a major shortage of capital assets in critical areas such as Auckland, where Watercare have red-zoned whole neighbourhoods saying you can't do any more development because we can't afford the pipes and the pumping stations, do we have the balance right? Do we have the balance right when our nearest neighbour is seriously improving and increasing the size of its defence force? Do we need to be putting more of our balance sheet into that? And again, imagine, Mr. Speaker, if we could have a mature discussion without the carping and the ideology and the people who may have, swallowed a thesaurus for Christmas, as far as I could tell, pulling out all these tropes. We actually need to say, look, these are the assets we have as a government. How do we get the best results, the best defence, the best healthcare? How do we make sure that we really do the best we can so that all of us can leave this place and feel like we have succeeded as a country and as a government and as a parliament? That's my challenge, or wero, that I lay down. And there's one more thing that numerous people brought up with me. Someone said to me just earlier this morning, David, I was thinking about the debate you're engaged in. I said, which one? But he meant the one about the Treaty Principles Bill. And so many people came up, and I want to acknowledge those people, thousands I would guess actually over the summer break, who said, we're right behind you, keep going. Because there is something deep down and innate in New Zealanders. It is our sense of fairness. New Zealand at its heart is an egalitarian project, a project of immigration that spans 1,000 years and counting, a nation of people who come here seeking better, but also a nation that believe that Jack's as good as his master. At some basic level, we all breathe the same air, we all bask in the same sun, we're all wet by the same rain, and we all deserve the same fundamental human rights. And I found it so interesting in the last day or so that all these people who say that Parliament has no right to debate the meaning of our treaty in the modern context by defining the principles and statute, well, you know what? They all showed up to participate in the debate. And that, I think, is the mystery for some, not for me, I have to say, but for some opponents of this bill, is why it has raised so many critical issues that New Zealanders want to discuss and I believe need to discuss. The answer is that for too long, questions like, can Parliament make this rule? Is it ultimately sovereign? Do we have equal rights? Is there a special place for Māori, and does it give different seats reserved at the table or different rights to be consulted in resource management law? Those are questions that this country fundamentally needs to decide in a civil and democratic manner. And I'm so proud to see that that is exactly what is happening. Even people who say they don't want the debate, rushing to the debate is actually a triumph and a fabulous thing for New Zealand. And even if, which I still doubt, this bill does not pass in this Parliament, I believe that sooner or later a bill very much like it will pass into law, because ultimately a house divided cannot stand. This country must decide, are we truly committed to universal human rights? Are we truly committed to the idea that each of us came to these islands to seek a better tomorrow for our children and their children? And therefore, are we going as New Zealanders to give each other equal dignity in politics and before the law and in everyday life? If that is the truth, then I would put it like this: all Kiwis will be equal forever, forever, forever. And it's actually quite fun to say. This treaty principles really stands for all Kiwis equal, ake, ake, ake. With that thought, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the debates in this chamber and to the work in government alongside my partners, Winston Peters and Christopher Luxon, and all of us across the coalition side in the House, doing the work to deliver on the hopes and dreams of the people that I asked and heard as I travelled the length of New Zealand this summer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.